very much to all of you for finding the time to join me this morning. I know it's not easy to find time in life in general, and especially if you're looking after someone with Lewy body dementia. I am well aware of how precious your time is. So I hope that you enjoy this morning's chat. We're going to talk a little bit about my dad's journey, but more about the article, why I wrote it, why it's been helpful, I think, and just talking a little bit about how we can all raise awareness. It doesn't need to be the grand gestures necessarily, but just to keep the conversation going. So I think perhaps one of the positives to have come out of the last 18 months, because I always like to try and find the positive when I can, is Zoom and the fact that we can all come together like this, kitchen table to kitchen table, from all corners of the UK, from the world, and have a chat, a coffee, a discussion. And I think looking back on my stepmother, who was my father's main carer's time with my dad, I think for her to be able to connect with more people in a similar position to herself would have been incredibly beneficial, and hopefully that Zoom will now enable that to happen, because I know she wasn't really able to leave him, and I think for people to be able to connect with each other is incredibly important, but I will get back to that later. So I guess that many of you are here. You'll have seen or read the essay, either some of it or all of it, that I wrote this year. And it was published in the Daily Telegraph, a shorter version, and I'm really grateful that the Lewy Body Society published the whole thing on their website. When I started writing it, I wasn't sure what I was writing really. Was it an article? Was it to raise awareness, to help other families, to help me heal my journey? And I'm still not entirely sure, but hopefully it's done a bit of everything. I'm not an expert. I'm just a daughter who lost her father from the inside out over many years to a disease that still very few people have heard of, and yet it is the second most common form of dementia in the UK. As you'll know from my piece, my father had Lewy body dementia, which for many, many years was undiagnosed. The doctors were confused. My father was confused. He was a retired dentist, and he always had an interest and a knowledge in medical things. He was a bit of a hypochondriac, truth be told, but he still couldn't work out what was wrong with him. His local GP in Norfolk didn't know how to put the pieces together. They suggested Alzheimer's in 2014, but it didn't seem to be the right fit for his illness, certainly not to his closest family. Some of his symptoms were more Parkinsonian, others didn't really fit either. And as we all know, Lewy body dementia is difficult to diagnose, disparate symptoms developing at different times, but fundamentally it just isn't well known. You know, you say LBD to people and they've never heard of it on the whole. We didn't get his diagnosis until 2016, which was 10 years after he'd first had some symptoms. To be fair, there weren't many at that stage. And then we started reading around. We found this wonderful charity and we realised that we weren't alone. And indeed, again, I'm going to say it again, it's the second most common form of dementia in this country. And I have friends that know lots of things about, you know, they like to consider themselves educated, well-informed, and no one, you know, I was saying Lewy body dementia to people and no one had heard of it. So during the later stages of my father's illness, I sat with him, holding his hand, chatting to him about life. My life, he wasn't able to chat back yet. And I often thought about writing a blog or a diary or something to help me process what I was going through and witnessing. And also because I sort of wanted to be able to remember the times that we were having together, even though it was a bit of a one-way street. Still, my father still loved him very, very much. I thought it would, and at the time, I thought it might be useful for other families going through a similar situation. But then I would drive home after the visit, find myself busy with my young family, barely had the time to write a shopping list, let alone an article. And so it moved on. But my only brother lives in Australia, and I used to email him after each visit to my dad. And when I looked back at some of those emails, when I was writing the piece, they took me right back to those moments where I was sitting with him. Like even now, I can go back to days or hours I had with him, and those memories were buried, but none were forgotten. I can almost summon them up now, and I'm sure many of you will find that you can do the same. After my dad died in 2019, I wrote his eulogy, which was again cathartic, and it was also really helpful to remember him at his best, which I know it's difficult for all of us to do at times, especially during the nature of the disease and the length it takes. And it was really lovely. The funeral in some ways was very uplifting in terms of reconnecting with people that had known him in his youth, and we all shared our most positive memories of him. And a year later, I found that I was thinking more and more about the whole journey that we'd been on as a family. The relief, I think I probably slightly felt at the release, but also the sadness that it had ended in this way, and the frustration that, you know, people didn't really know about this illness. And time had obviously given me a bit of time to heal and more perspective. And when I finally sat down to write the piece, it actually all came together very, very fast and was very cathartic to write, and much longer than I had imagined it would be. It was a real download for me emotionally, and it really, really helped me. I've always expressed myself well on paper. It's not the first time I've written anything. Since childhood, I've written a diary, not every day, but time to time. And in times of crisis, I always like a bit of journaling. And I actually have written 5 novels. Feels like a lifetime ago now, but I did that before I had children. I also worked at the BBC. So a communicator and expresser of myself via words has always been my thing. So then I wrote the essay and I thought, okay, and I didn't really know whether I wanted to show it to anyone or who it was for. And then I decided to be braver than I felt. And I contacted the Lewy Body Society and sent it to Jackie, just to see initially if it was something that they would be interested in for their website and for the Dotty Days Awareness Week, which I then was aware of. Got my little badge, and Jackie and Kate were very warm and supportive. And between us, we approached a few people about taking the article to a wider audience. But we hadn't really had any joy. And the week before, I was walking my dog and thinking, oh, it's a shame, because I think actually the few people I'd shown it to were very positive about it. And then I remembered that someone I used to work for way back in my 20s at the BBC had written a few parenting articles for the broadsheets in the past. And I hate networking. I always find it really awkward. Hi, remember me from 100? Anyway, I emailed her and explained why. And I don't know what possessed me, but I'm glad I did anyway. So she sent me a couple of names of people to approach. Again, another deep breath, sent some emails out there to people I didn't know, enclosing this very personal essay. I haven't heard back from the Times yet, so I look forward to that email. The Telegraph replied almost immediately, so I suspect it must have landed on the right desk on the right day. You always need a bit of luck in life. It doesn't all happen by accident. And they were interested. They were more interested in not so much in my personal story, which they obviously found very moving, but they were more interested in Lewy body dementia itself. And the fact that it was less well known than it should be. And they asked me to do an enormous edit, which I did in 24 hours, much to my family's thrill and delight. And they said it would be out on Sunday. So I gathered my children for a moment of pride. I've been a full-time mum now for the last 10 or 11 years. I thought, here we are, we'll just show them that there's more to me than the washing machine and lunch. And we went to the paper shop and we bought the paper and it wasn't there. So that was a lesson in resilience for all of us. And they actually published it on the Monday, as you all maybe have seen. And the reason for that being that there was an article about dementia in the supplement that week as well. So they couldn't have 2 things in one day. Anyway, it actually ended up being to our benefit, I think. They put it in the health section on Monday and it was online. And the response, I have to say, was wonderful. And quite overwhelming, actually. I mean, a lot of people, read the paper on their tablets, or we all consume news now in very different ways. I don't know, I don't have the figures from the Telegraph themselves. On Twitter, I shared the link, and I don't have many followers, but I shared the link with the full article, and that has been viewed 9,900 times. I'm just looking, I've written it down. And the Telegraph article was viewed 4,221 times. So that's the Telegraph, the full version, which then the Lewy Body Society published, 9,900 times. So I was quite amazed by that. My husband shared it on his LinkedIn post. I'm not LinkedIn, but he is. 10,000 people viewed his post. He looked it up actually for me this week. And again, the response, I shared it on Facebook. My younger daughters, junior school, shared it on their weekly newsletter. I shared it on our street WhatsApp group. I went for it. I thought, if I'm doing this, I'm going to do this properly. It's Awareness Week and no one's going to do this for me. I had a bit of a moment of inspiration, and it gathered momentum. And it was really interesting. The response was so warm, so overwhelming. And, who knows about the numbers, but it just shows people are interested. They are interested. They have a thirst for knowledge. And I do think that they're more likely to read something if it's come to them with a personal recommendation or a personal connection of some sort. But what was so heartwarming, and I think most emotional to me, were how many people reached out to me from all corners of my life, past and present, some of whom have been touched by Lewy body dementia already and knew exactly what we'd been through. Others were keen to connect and talk because they thought a family member of theirs may have had it or currently have it and was struggling with many of the things that we've all dealt with in the past. But they were more than any of that. They were so happy to connect and know that they were not alone. People said I was brave. I wasn't brave. My father was brave throughout his illness, but I think people find it still, you know, people share and overshare, but the really difficult things to talk about are the most personal. And what I'm learning now at nearly 50 is that actually the community out there is what we all need to help us get through life with all its bumps and along the way. There is no perfect life. People go through all sorts of things, and everyone's family is touched with illnesses, and dementia is one of the ones that we are all going to have to deal with more and more, I suspect, and Lewy body dementia will be part of that. But as ever, when you say dementia to people, they immediately assume Alzheimer's. So anyway, the sense of community was fantastic, and I think the desire of families who had been through LBD before, that had reached out to me, that didn't know anyone else that had had a relation with that had suffered with the same disease, or anyone, were so happy to have someone that they could talk to. And I had a random message from a patient of my father. He was a dentist, who sent me a really lovely message just thanking me for the article and saying she remembered him so well in his heyday, and he was the reason she still had brilliant teeth age 70, and remembering him at his best and sharing some memories that made me smile, and, you know, absolutely brought him back as he was in his heyday. My stepmother was actually the one person that found the article, I think, the hardest to read, I would say. As I said before, she was his main carer, and she did an outstanding job, and it really nearly broke her along the way several times. As a lot of you will know, it's a relentless thing to have to care with someone with Lewy body dementia, someone you love the most, to watch them literally. I mean, for me, it was watching him fall apart from the inside out. Physically, he looked the same in many ways right until the end. But just losing him bit by bit is incredibly painful. She used to be a nurse, and she was much younger than him, second wife, so had the energy. But even with all of that, it was very, very hard. And I think only now, 2 years later, is she starting to really process and grieve. I think it was so full on, and she did an incredible job. But I know she felt very exhausted and very overwhelmed, and more than all of that, very alone, even though we all spent time with her. You know, all of us that have been through different things know that unless you've been through it, you can give sympathy and empathy, you think, but only if you've been down the road already do you know what it really is like. And I think that's what she really would have benefited from. There wasn't really any peer-to-peer support at that time. And I think hopefully talks like this, and hopefully the work that Jackie and her amazing team are doing in bringing the community together so people can lean on each other a bit, is something that will help people. It's obviously not going to fix everything, but it will just make people realise that there are plenty of other people going through very similar situations, and sometimes it just feels better to either listen to somebody else's story, or to be able to share your story, to cry, or even to laugh about some of the more ridiculous moments that we all find ourselves in. Certainly in our family, we always managed to dredge up a bit of humour. Even in the darkest days, there was laughter. Not a lot of laughter, but some laughter. So there's no magic wand, is really what I want to say. But if by talking and raising awareness, we can help the carers, the friends, and the families of people with Lewy body dementia feel less alone, feel supported and heard, I think that's something we can all do. And it doesn't have to be a grand gesture or an article in the paper or a billboard. It just has to be start. I think I've thought about this, obviously, in coming up to today. I think it really just you need to start by not being afraid to talk about it. That sounds like a really straightforward thing, but I think when people say, you know, the buck starts here. So to all of you living with a family member or have a friend with Lewy body dementia, when people ask you how you're feeling or how your week was or how your summer was, go against your British instinct to say, fine, I'm fine, thanks. It's all good. Yeah, it's all good, I'm fine. Because you're not really fine. And actually they might not be fine either, but they don't know that if you say you're fine. You're just keeping them just there, which is it's the easy place to keep people. Definitely, we've all done it. But if there's one thing I've learned, you have to be prepared to, and you don't have to give them the 3-hour version. I'm not saying that everyone wants to know the whole story, but don't be afraid to say that actually it's really tough. My dad, husband, son, father, you know, has Lewy body dementia. He's been diagnosed. You know, just mention it in passing, because the more times that people hear the word Lewy body dementia, the more it will become part of our just conversation. And also the more you share, you don't have to share the whole thing, and maybe that's not the moment, but don't be afraid to say that it's not fine, because immediately I found I felt much better because I'd been honest. I wasn't fine. And people generally they can't help you unless you reach out. Now, if they're having a really bad day, and then you will have the odd friend that goes, oh, really? Oh, well, my insert name of relative has just been diagnosed with stage 4 something. There's always the competitive friend, and you go, oh, well, that's really awful. You know, so not everyone will necessarily be able to help. But I do think that by being honest and by sharing, you will feel better and you'll make a connection. And then maybe on one of your darker days, you'll bump into that person again and they'll say, how are you? And actually, instead of having to then start with you can say, well, obviously, as you know, things haven't been easy. And then it's much easier to have a little chat. And it doesn't need to be a big heart to heart sometimes. Just that connection can really help you get through a day. And generally, I've found that people are incredibly happy to help, whether it's a dog walk on your behalf with your dog, or in my stepmom's case, someone used to come and sit with my dad so she could go and walk her dogs, because actually, more than anything, she just needed to get out of the house sometimes, or go to bed and have a nap and know that someone else was sitting with him. This is at the point where he could no longer walk himself. So he wasn't, but she couldn't leave him in the house on his own. That just felt all wrong. And neighbours were incredibly helpful and happy to help. Obviously easier for them to pop out to the shops and get her something. But sometimes more than anything, she just needed to get out of the house on her own without a responsibility, even if it was only for an hour or 2 hours, just to be alone. And he spent many weeks in a couple of different care homes over his illness. And the guilt for her in those moments was enormous, but it absolutely was what she needed on both occasions. Once she was moving to a bungalow so that they could live in a safe way at home, and the other time she had to have an operation on her back, mainly because she'd been, using a hoist, but moving, an 11-stone baby around all day long for weeks and weeks on end. So it does take a physical toll and a mental toll. And I think that just being prepared to admit that everything isn't fine is the very first step in raising awareness, and give it a name. Tell them why you're not fine, what you're dealing with. I think it's really, really important. People will, and then somehow at a grassroots level, word will get round, because people mention it to other people and say, oh, have you heard so-and-so terrible Lewy body dementia? Never heard of it. What is it? And it's just a conversation that becomes part of our dialogue. People like knowledge. And I think it is just, the education can start at a very grassroots level. This is a good thing. I've been wearing my Dotty Days wristband since the awareness week, and the number of people go, oh, that's nice. Thank you very much. What's it for? And again, don't go into a long chat with them. I just say, oh, my dad had Lewy body dementia, and blah, blah. That can be all I say sometimes. Or then, of course, they might say, oh, good. I didn't know anyone else that had it. My great uncle had it, or whatever it is. So I think that's something you can do that's really easy. And when your child's looking for a charity to support at school, I don't know about, you've got children or grandchildren, they often have a charity week and they're looking for charities to support. Suggest the Lewy Body Society, or if they're doing a cake sale or a fundraiser, or at the school fair, they sometimes, choose a number of charities. For my daughter, my youngest daughter was 8 when he died, and she mentioned it a couple of times at school. We didn't do a talk about it, but we did one of our cake sales. We sort of split the profits, but it's just about raising awareness. And it may not be the charity that's chosen, but again, it's been mentioned. And I think that's more the point. It sounds awful, the poster boy. So the one person that everyone always talks about when you talk about Lewy body dementia is Robin Williams. And so much loved, so talented, so admired, and everyone will, remembers that he committed suicide, and they assumed it was mental torment, as many amazingly creative and passionate comedians seem to have a dark side often. Very few people know that the link was with his Lewy body dementia, which actually wasn't diagnosed, I think, until after he died. But his widow has written incredibly about his deterioration and his battle. She called it the terrorists in his brain, but how he really, really struggled. And actually, I read something on the internet around, it must have been his birthday, but his son posted something really amazing also recently. So again, just, if Robin Williams comes up, you don't have to bring it up, but, oh, he died of Lewy body dementia. Oh, okay. It's just about relating it to people that they know. So I suppose the rules are, and there are no rules really, is that, if you have an interested audience or an opportunity to mention it, please do. I think that for me is what I've learned, is that you don't have to go into great detail, but it's just about getting the word out there. You can explain it's like dementia and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's rolled into one, which is how I do it as a summary, with some extra special symptoms like the visual hallucinations, the sleep disturbances, whatever it is. But people don't necessarily want the whole story. They just want to know that, you've been through something. And I think it's good and cathartic for you to be able to mention it, and they in turn will talk to others. So I think don't be afraid. I think you'll be amazed, I've discovered, at how many families have been touched by this disease, even if they don't know its name yet. Another thing that was apparent to me when people got in touch is they were like, oh, the doctor said it was this, but now I've read this. I think maybe it was Lewy body dementia, and maybe that will help some families get a diagnosis, or maybe it will just help put their minds at rest if they didn't ever have a diagnosis, that there was a disease, that it could have been. I don't know. There was one neighbour in our street, there's always one in every street, when I circulated the article, who sent me a direct message. You have to be careful of those. It's quite a character, that's all I'll say. And he said, well, I mean, I've read it now. And I mean, quite frankly, you've listed all the symptoms. I mean, everyone's got those. I mean, everyone. I mean, you know, we haven't all got Lewy body. And I was like, no, dear, insert name. Thank you so much for your feedback on my article. I'm so glad you enjoyed it. I wasn't suggesting that, you know, you would, it's not a tick list, and it's obviously, you know, everyone has them in a different way, but these are the things to look out for. So there'll always be some smart ass, obviously, who feels like, you know, pushing back and telling you that it's all, you know, making a bit of a fuss out of nothing. But anyway, I would just want to say thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to talk to you. And I would be really interested to hear some of your stories, how long it was before you had a diagnosis, friends and family's reactions, and how difficult you find or easy you find to talk about it. And I just think if we can discuss how we can all raise awareness, really, and how to support each other best through similar situations. So that's really me in a nutshell.